Okay, for the last part of this project, we're going to be adding our own camera. So we're going to be making a camera that we can actually animate and frame our animation. So the project, if you go look at the project before watching all these videos, you're supposed to make a ball bounce around and do something. So that can either hit a vase or bounce off the wall or make a basket, impale itself on a spike, whatever you want to do. You're just going to use some of the techniques that you've learned in these 3 videos to get there. So the last thing we're going to do is actually add an animated camera so we can keyframe and watch our ball in different angles. So to add a camera, you're going to go to Create Panel, and you're going to click on Cameras, and you're going to change from, well, you're going to leave it on Standard. If you're using 2020 or 2019, you may have different cameras there, but you want to stay on Standard, or you don't want to be using physically based cameras, which I think is what they were called. I don't remember exactly. But we're going to stick with Standard, and we have 2 types. We have free and we have target. So I'm going to show you the difference real quick. So if I click down a free camera and click it, it's going to shove it into the ground, and this is it. So now what I can do is I can go ahead and rotate it, and I can try to figure out what it's looking at. So this is where it gets kind of hard to figure out what you're looking at. So what you can do is give yourself another window that you split into the camera view. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this little arrow here, create a new viewport layout tab, and then I'm going to click the side by side. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this right one here, and I'm going to hit P for perspective. And that's going to give me my normal perspective camera. However, I'm going to switch to default shading. And then I'm going to come over here to the left one, and I'm going to hit C for camera. So it switches me to my camera view, and of course I can turn back on default shading. So now I can come in my perspective window, and I can change my camera's rotation, I can change where it is, and that kind of gives me an idea of what I'm looking at, because I can actually see it here in this view. One thing I'm going to want to do on the camera is change its rotation to object. So I'm going to click up here where it says view, and I'm going to change it to local. So that way it puts my rotation axes attached to the camera instead of staying on the world coordinate, so it's easier to understand which way I'm actually rotating it instead of having them a little bit off kilter. Okay, so now let's look at actually keyframing a camera. So I'm going to turn on auto key. And so my ball is going to bounce and leave the view and go to frame 90 where it leaves. So I'm going to go ahead and just turn the camera. So it's looking at it. Now we have this action where the camera is actually rotating with the ball. Maybe at frame 50, I want the camera to actually be closer to the ground. So now you can see that it actually slides down to the ground and turns. Then at frame 90, I'm going to go ahead and have it come back up and rotate a little bit so it's straight. And now we have this whole sequence. Okay, so that actually allows me to make a more interesting animation by just simply animating my camera. So you can do a ton with an animated camera. Now what we also have to do is we have to make sure we're going to render it at a proper frame rate and a proper resolution and all of that stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up the rendering commands right now so we can see the camera and exactly what the camera's seeing, which right now we can't see. We can just see what it's looking out of, but not its actually render resolution. So I'm going to fix that. So I'm going to click on this render setup. You can hit F10 or click on this teapot with the gears. Okay. Now by default, it wants to use the Arnold renderer. We don't want to use that. We just want to use the standard scanline renderer. So just switch where it says render to scanline. Now, what it's asking me is view to render. I'm going to make sure that I'm actually rendering from camera 1. So I'm going to click camera 1. Okay. Now down here, it's going to say what is our range, right, in our time output. So I'm going to go range is going to be 0 to 90 because that's where our kind of animation ends. So we'll do 90. And our output size is I'm going to click on this and I'm going to choose HDTV video. And then it should by default give you 1920 by 1080, but if it doesn't for some reason, you can just click 1920 by 1080. Okay. Then we scroll down a little bit and we have our render output. So this is where it's going to save the file. So what we can do is we're going to click on Files, and this is where it's going. So right now it's going to render output, which I don't want it to go. I want it to go to my desktop. So I'm going to click on Desktop, and I'm going to go ahead and give it a file name. So I'm going to call this Ball Bounce Test, and then Save as Type, all formats. I'm going to change that to AVI, and then just left-click somewhere so the Setup window comes up. I'm going to click on Setup. Now this is really important that we switch this to the MJPEG compressor, otherwise it's not going to render us a movie. So MJPEG compressor, and I went ahead and gave it a quality of 100 and hit OK, and then I clicked on Save. Okay, so now that's set up. Now the only reason I wanted to set that up right now is so that I could come over here and I can go to Camera 1 and I can show safe frames, and then that actually limits the view to what it can see. So what your render resolution is what it's going to show you. So if I switch that render resolution, for instance, so if I change this to 480 by 270, well, these are all 16 by 9, so it shouldn't change the window here. But if I change this to NTSC video, you can see 720 by 486 is a 4 by 3 window, so it changes that window. And we want 1920 by 1080, and that's perfect. And again, we're rendering from camera 1, and that's going to go ahead and render this out for us. And I'll show you how to render it in just a second. Let me go ahead and add another camera here. So this is going to be our target camera, and these are a little bit different. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Target. I'm going to left click and drag, and when you left click and drag, you can see it creates a camera, and it also creates this little tiny box. So I'm going to drag that box over to the ball, and I'm going to show you a very, very cool trick that we can do with that. So right now we're looking through camera 1, so I'm going to click where it says camera 1 and go to cameras, and this will now be camera 2, so we can see exactly what this camera sees. I turn off auto key. I want to make sure to turn off auto key so I don't accidentally keyframe this camera yet. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll this, bring this camera up, and if you notice, it stares at this little box. So wherever I move the box is what that camera is looking at. So this is where we have a really, really cool trick, is I'm going to move the box over to the ball. I'm going to put it above the ball for right now, and I want to parent the ball. So what that's going to do is it's going to link this box to the ball. So essentially wherever this ball goes, this box is going to follow it, and therefore my camera will follow it from there. So I'm going to click on this little select and link button. So I'm going to click on the box and drag off of it and select the ball. Now I'm going to hit W to switch back to my move tool and then move this inside of the ball. So now if I scrub this animation, you notice the camera just simply moves up and down with the ball. Perfect. Now this is what makes target cameras really cool, is I can now select the camera by itself and adjust its position in the world, and it still animates and follows the ball. But I can also turn on auto key, and I can like scrub this to like frame, say 25, 26, and raise this up, and maybe move it over. So now you can see that it's actually moving, and then at frame 90, we'll go ahead and have it catch up to the ball. So now we have that actually moving with the ball. Very simple. Okay, now to actually render this out, I'm going to turn off auto key. Now to actually render this out, I'm going to go ahead and click on my render setup button. And remember, we have column 1, it doesn't know what camera to use anymore, so it's using camera 2. Or I can just turn on my other camera, which I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and switch this back to camera 1. And I'm going to choose, yep, camera 1, perfect. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to just simply hit render. And you're going to see it render this whole thing out. It renders it 1 frame at a time. Usually we don't render at 1080p. And if your machine is really slow, this is where rendering can really kill a machine. If you're remoting into the computers, which that is supposed to be finished this week if you are counting on that. So that's supposed to be finished this week, and I'll get all those instructions out as soon as I have them. But we're just going to render this out. So if you notice it's rendering, I'll go ahead and pause the video and come back when it's done. Okay, so it's finished rendering, and now what I can do is I can go ahead and minimize this stuff. So I'm just going to hit Windows D, which goes to my desktop. And then I can actually see my ball bounce right here. It's on my desktop. It was over here. I just moved it. So I can double click that, and there it is. So it's actually a rendered movie. And this should be pretty small. Yeah, 8.43 megabytes, nice and small. So you can just turn that in. So for this project, I want you to turn in your rendered movie. And that's going to be what your final for this project is, just to turn that in. The whole movie, get that turned in. And also go ahead and submit your max file as well. So we'll submit your max file and your movie. And this should get you through this project. So again, have a lot of fun with this and make the ball do whatever you want. And it can be longer than 90 frames. Like 90 frames was just what I used for 3 bounces, which isn't very long. 90 frames is only 3 seconds. So what you can do is actually do, 120, but always make sure it's in multiples of 30 or 60, depending on what your frame rate is. Right now, we should be rendering at 30 frames a second, so don't stress too much. Use 30 as your timer. 30 frames per 1 second. I'm sorry. All right, so I look forward to seeing these.